How's it going?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not bad, not bad. I had a disturbing start to my day, though.
Really? How
Yeah,
so?
well, Holly baked some bran muffins last night, which is a South African thing. I don't know if you've ever come across bran muffins. I hadn't before I married a South African.
No, but they don't sound particularly nice. That's disparaging the whole of South Africa, I guess. I shouldn't say that.
I think basically they're just a vessel for delivering other flavours. So like the bran makes up the bulk of the thing, and then we put apple and raspberries in our one.
Oh, okay. I was thinking like bran flakes muffin or something horrendous.
You basically make it from bran flakes, but you blend it down and you mix and you use that kind of instead of flour. Kind of.
Right, okay. So it's a filler. Sure. Okay.
Yeah, so then you mix it with sugar and milk and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so ours were strawberry and apple flavour.
Oh, very nice.
We had them for breakfast this morning, and I put strawberry jam on mine, and Holly put strawberry jam and cheddar cheese on hers.
What?
Yeah, and so what I'm worried about now is whether I can still get a divorce, even though I can't leave the house.
I think the law would look favourably upon you.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure an online divorce would be fine. I think it's just filling in a form and
Yeah. Quickie divorce.
yeah.
Cheddar cheese and strawberries. What the hell?
Yeah, it's terrible, isn't it?
It's a South African thing, isn't it?
Apparently so. Yeah, I mean, I don't get the whole mixing of sweet and savoury at the best of times. Although I do like Hawaiian pizza. That's the one exception to the rule.
Yeah, we can't be friends anymore. I'm sorry, it's over.
How's self-isolation week 2 going for you?
Yeah, not bad. The sun wasn't shining today, which is quite disappointing.
No.
But I did go down the shops to get some necessities, and quite amusingly, there was quite a few Oscar performances of people throwing themselves out of my way.
Oh, really?
So the pavements aren't overly huge in my town, and normally, people sort of push you off the pavement into the road rather than get out your way. Not today. No. They were like I say, Oscar-winning performances, people throwing themselves onto the grass or onto the road just to avoid me. So how about you? How's the garden coming? Any more industrial weed killer used?
We had shite weather today as well, so we've been inside. But in theory, we're expecting the pond delivery any day.
Oh.
We pulled all the old paving slabs up, which was a bastard of a job.
Oh, yeah, heavy.
Just massive, heavy blocks of some of them were big concrete slabs, but others were just like free-poured concrete and gravel that they kind of made in these things that were like 6 foot long and like 4 or 5 inches thick. It was ridiculous.
Oh my god,
we couldn't lift
so
them.
Heavy.
Yeah, we got like a crowbar to get them out the ground.
Yeah,
and the concrete ones we just lifted between us. Like the smaller ones we could lift ourselves, and the other ones we just put between us.
Yeah,
but these big ones we just couldn't move them.
No, I mean 4 or 5 inches thick. I mean that's insane.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. We had to hit it with a sledgehammer to break the fucking thing.
Yeah, completely. How about socialising online and stuff whilst this has been going on?
I've been trying to actually had to cut it down a little bit because I've been doing so freaking
I know what
much.
you mean. I'm actually something more online than I was in reality beforehand. Good.
Yeah, it's good. It's keeping me sane. But yeah, it's getting a bit crazy. How many online games are you in now?
Oh God, 3 or 4, I think. And more, keep being organised like I'd love to, but although we played with a bunch of friends, Don't Starve Together the weekend, didn't we?
Jeez, that was like 8 hours of my life in an instant. I don't know what happened.
It's a sinkhole.
That's ridiculously addictive, that thing.
So Don't Starve Together is basically a sort of survival game, essentially, with like cutesy Tim Burton graphics, I would say. It's not made by Tim Burton or anything to do with Tim Burton, but that called it style of graphics.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty hard game ordinarily. It's very difficult, and if you die, you can possibly come back once, maybe, but that's it. You're dead, and all your progress in the game is lost, and you have to start all over again. So we dialed the difficulty settings quite a bit and made it a lot easier, but I still ended up dying about 18 times.
Yeah, it was still terrifying. Particularly when it got to night time and everything just went pitch black all of a sudden. I kept forgetting how to operate my torch.
The trouble is, you begin to panic immediately, so you can't get your torch out.
Well, that
you don't know
was
which
it, yeah.
button's on.
I ended up at one point I had a whole load of cool stuff, and it suddenly got dark, so I dropped all my cool stuff frantically trying to select my torch, and also running at the same time. So I was running through the dark, dropping my things, trying to desperately get my torch out of my bag, and I never found all that stuff again. I've no idea where it was.
Yeah, I kept losing my bodies actually. Every time I died, I thought I was going back to the same sort of spot, and I wasn't. I don't know. I lost about 3 or 4 bodies in that way.
Yeah. That was vicious.
Yeah, it was quite horrifying. But obviously, what it turns out, what the learning I took away from that game was that the swamps are really hard. But I kept going back to them. I think I'd learn. I didn't.
Yeah, you see 4 or 5 corpses next to each other where you've been killed, gone back to get your stuff, and then been killed again, and then
that's right.
rinse and repeat.
the tentacle launches out of the ground and starts hitting you, and you're dead again. Like, oh!
Like, it's fine. This time I'll see the tentacle coming, and I'll be able to get out. It's no, it's killed me again.
Exactly. Oh no, I'm dead. Oh. But my favourite part of that game, I wasn't anywhere near the base when it happened, but one of our friends had put a sign in the ground. I don't know what the sign said.
It said, "Welcome to Edward's camp," and the home of Edward and his minions, or something like that.
Right. Okay. And obviously, I guess you took offence to this because
I did a bit. Yeah.
One minute I hear Ed going, Harrison, why you set the sign on fire, Harrison? Why did you do that? Oh God! Now the potter's wheel's on fire, Harrison. Harrison? Oh God! Now the farms are on fire. And I know this has happened to me before. I know how bad it is, and the whole camp burned down.
Well, to be fair, the whole camp didn't quite burn down, only because we stopped the server before that happened. But
indeed, we rolled back a day or two.
In my defence, I'd only just discovered that I could set things on fire, so obviously I had to set something on fire to test it.
So you set something in the middle of the camp on fire?
Well, it was right next to the campfire where we'd been having a fire every night, so I thought it would be fine. Turns out not so much.
No, you've definitely got to get fire breaks in that game. Oh, I've burned entire civilizations in that game before. And
then just before I ended for the evening, one of our other friends had built a wooden boat and was going off exploring.
Yes.
So I jumped on the boat and he told me to bring fire. So I accidentally made a campfire instead of a torch. So I put a campfire in the middle of his wooden boat. Which, as you would expect, then promptly set the boat on fire. At least we have the internet to entertain us in these difficult times, eh?
This is true, absolutely. We can learn from the internet as well.
We can indeed. In fact, that's exactly what I've done this week. How about you?
Yep, same here. Absolutely. I've got a good piece, I think.
You got a good piece. Okay, well, if you're that confident, then you can go first. How about that?
Well, thank you very much. Cool. Okay, so this week then on the internet, I learned all about the Olympics.
Oh.
Yeah, and how the history of the modern games is actually quite dark.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But before we get to any of that, let's find out how the Olympics first started.
Sure.
It was actually the ancient Greeks that came up with the concept of the Olympic Games, with the first edition being run in Olympia from 776 BC to 550 BC. So a very long time ago.
Yeah.
To the Greeks, it wasn't simply a matter of playing sports, but also a religious festival that allowed them to worship not only Zeus, but also many other gods, with altars scattered all over the site of the games. So they turned it into a festival, basically. And certainly, once the height of it came, there was also, if you wanted to be known for anything, it's where all the people were, so you'd kind of go there and do your performances and things. So it became a real massive festival.
Nice.
Athletes competed in a range of sports during the Olympics, including wrestling, boxing, long jump, javelin, discus, and specifically during the 1st century AD, chariot racing, which proved to be very popular with audiences. Yeah, I can imagine, can't you? It's like modern day Formula One, I'd imagine. Chariots thundering around the, or whatever they're racing around. Talking of audiences, although the stadium could accommodate over 40,000 people at the height of the game's popularity in the 2nd century AD, Olympia was actually located in a very rural region. So rural, in fact, that apart from the run up to the games and the games themselves, the Greeks would actually grow wheat in the stadium.
Jeez.
So yeah, after all those athletes and locals had to be fed.
Well, yeah, I guess there's a certain amount of logic to that, isn't there?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Maybe they should do that here for Wembley or something. They can just grow like hot dogs there throughout the year and wait for the big games. I don't know how sport works. I don't know. What I'm doing. That metaphor got away from me very quickly.
But could work, especially in these COVID times. I mean,
you never
growing
know.
something on the grass.
Got to do something with that grass.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's no specific evidence of when the ancient Olympic Games ended, but it appears though that although Theodosius I banned all pagan festivals in fact, in AD 394, there is archaeological evidence that indicates that some of the games were still held after this time. We just don't know when they ended, really. That's the main thing. So how did the modern Olympic Games come into reality? Well, we have one man, I'm going to probably butcher his name as I butcher anybody who's not English's name. He's a Frenchman. He's called Pierre de Coubertin.
Oh, that sounded pretty good to me.
It'll get worse. I've got to say his name a number of times now.
Just call him Pierre. That's fine.
Yeah.
We know
that's
who you're
true.
talking about.
Yeah, that's true. I should have done that. I called him Coubertin, so yeah, it's not going to go well here. But yeah, we got him to thank for the Olympic Games that we know and love. Pierre was born in 1863 in Paris, in France, to aristocratic parents. And during the 1800s, sports were becoming increasingly popular, especially with the upper classes, as a way of improving health and well-being. Obviously, we know a lot more today about sports and how useful an exercise is to people. But prior to the 1800s, it was believed that the more sedentary you were, certainly in France, the better it was. So yeah, 1800s turned up and the people started realising how much better it was to be doing sport. And Pierre himself enjoyed rowing, boxing and fencing as he was growing up. So yeah, aristocratic family, all those kind of privileges that come with that.
I think fencing is such a ridiculous sport. It just looks ridiculous, like poking each other with little wired stick things.
Yeah. It's even now. It's part of the Olympics, isn't it?
Yeah, give them a proper sword and a shield and make a proper spectacle of it.
Turn it into medieval games.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what we all
hack
want.
a limb off.
Give them an axe or something like that. Now we're talking.
I think health and safety might have a problem with that. Actually.
Wow. Yeah, probably.
Bring back the chariot racing. So, during the 1880s, Coubertin, or Pierre Coubertin, came to believe that sports and physical education would save France from future military disgrace. And he ended up visiting the United States and England multiple times during the decade to study athletics administration. And it wasn't, he wasn't doing it, he didn't seem to be doing it, all of this study and in his interest in sports necessarily for anything other than making sure that France could beat probably Germany in future wars. So it was an interesting way of coming at this problem, I have to say. So upon his return to France in the 1890s, the French government actually asked him to hold athletics congresses. Say that easily, which featured events such as horseback riding, fencing, track and field. Fencing again. He did, obviously, aristocrat loves the fencing. And you can see that Coubertin was very much involved in developing sports and how they're accessed by people through the education system during this time. But how did he come to invent the modern Olympic Games as we know them? Well, although Coubertin never managed to reinvigorate France's physical education system, his work during that time and his travels to America and England actually inspired him to implement an even more ambitious plan. Coubertin wanted countries to compete in athletics-based events, and he wanted to base them on the Greek Olympic festivals that I talked about earlier on. So in 1892, Coubertin presented the idea of the modern Olympics as a jubilee of the French Union of Athletic Sports Societies. Say that with your teeth in.
Crikey. It's a fancy sounding group.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some indication he may have actually even set this group up. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not really sure. Maybe not. I don't know. There was differing opinions on that. And it seems the idea was vague. This Olympics idea was vague even to Coubertin himself, because he hadn't fleshed it out very much by this point. And so it wasn't actually very well received by the French Union of Athletic Sports Societies. But this did not deter Coubertin at all. 2 years later, in 1894, he invited 79 representatives from 12 countries to attend a sports conference on how to revive the Olympic Games. Out of this conference, the committee decided on the basics of the Games in that they would run every 4 years, and the first one would take place in Olympia in Greece. Obviously, even at this early stage, you can tell that symbolism was very important to Coubertin and the conference participants.
Yeah.
And they set the stage for the Olympics, as is known now today, obviously every 4 years.
Yeah.
Later in 1894, a group called the International Olympic Committee was formed, and probably quite rightly, Coubertin was unanimously elected the president.
It would have been awkward if someone else had got the gig.
Can you imagine?
He'd be a bit pissed,
we want this guy over here. Thanks. You've done your job.
Thanks for all your work here. We'll call you, don't we?
Yeah, don't call us. But yes, he held the position of president of the IOC for 29 years before retiring. The first modern Olympic Games were held for 10 days from the 5th of April, just 2 years later in 1896, and included 280 competitors. But 200 of those actually came from Greece. And I did read that one guy from Italy jogged all the way because he couldn't afford, I guess, a boat ticket at that point.
Jeez.
He jogged all the way to compete. It's not actually there's no information about how he actually did in his event. I'm assuming it was something to do with running, but no information about that.
You'd hope so, wouldn't you?
Yeah, totally. And they competed in races such as obviously in foot races, lawn tennis, swimming, diving, fencing again, bike races, shooting, rowing, and even a yacht race. So even back then, even in 1896, you can obviously see that the same sort of sports are being played.
Yeah.
Athletes are competing in the same sort of things that we do nowadays. 14 countries participated in the original games, original modern Olympic Games, and they included Denmark, Australia, France and Greece. And the games themselves included opening and closing ceremonies. So really, obviously, over time, things have been built up and it's quite a bit different to what it was in 1896. But the actual basics were laid down right at the beginning as to what we even do nowadays.
Straight from day one.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the 1896 Games introduced the first marathon with the endurance race setting off from a Greek town called Marathon. And it was aptly won by a Greek, I'm going to murder his name too, Spiridion Lewis. Lewis? I don't know.
Anyway, with Greek names, you're on your own.
I'm on my names. Perhaps just focus on like British and American and Australian names. I don't know. Anyway, Lewis, along with all of the other winners at the games, were awarded a silver medal, not a gold medal, and an olive branch and a diploma. How very nice. How very very civilised. The Summer Olympic Games have been held for a total of 29 times across 19 countries, with the United States hosting the most at 4.
Of course.
Followed by the UK, followed by the UK at 3 games. The games have since race 6 expanded to include the Winter Games, the Paralympics for disabled athletes to compete, and the overall Olympic Games themselves, obviously in summertime, and they've become big business. Lots of corporations sponsoring and what have you. But what about the dark history I alluded to at the beginning of this piece? Well, as much as Coubertin was instrumental in creating the modern Olympic Games, he considered women's sport to be, quote, the most unaesthetic sight human eyes could contemplate.
Ooh.
What a nice man.
Yeah, lovely.
Jeez,
that's a quote that's aged well.
Oh, yeah, it gets better. In fact, in 1912, he said, quote, the Olympic Games must be reserved for men. So obviously today's way of thinking about sexism, and that's completely and rightly abhorrent. Not aged well at all. So as much as he was instrumental in setting up the modern Olympic Games, he obviously had some very awful ways of thinking as well.
Yeah. Dated, shall we say? Yeah,
very, very dated, absolutely. And unfortunately, over time, obviously the Olympics have come to include women in them, because obviously that would be awful if they didn't. Next up is the 1936 Games, which were actually held in Berlin in Germany. And although the Games were originally awarded to Germany before the Nazis came to power, they obviously occurred when the Nazis were in power, and they saw great potential in the propaganda coup they could take with this.
I bet they did.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, and obviously, in history, future dates from 1936 onwards, the Nazis did everything possible to show Germany was a welcoming and hospitable nation during the Games, and that included reducing violence they were perpetrating at the time against Jewish people, removing anti-Jewish signs, and ensuring the visitors during the Games wouldn't be subjected to anti-homosexual laws. So they tidied themselves up nicely just for that short 4-week. Few week period. While some people who visited Germany for the Games saw through the Nazi propaganda, an American journalist at the time, William Schreier, wrote in his journal, quote, I'm afraid the Nazis succeeded with their propaganda. So I think obviously at the time nobody knew what was going to come next, the Second World War and their terrible acts of violence against everybody.
Yeah, well, if there's one thing they're good at, it's propaganda.
Absolutely, yeah. And although there was worldwide pressure for countries to boycott, because obviously some people could see, I guess, through the Nazis and what they were saying and what they were doing, and so there was pressure for countries to actually boycott the 1936 Games. Actually, only the Soviet Union ended up refusing to take part, so everybody else went along as normal. But on one small beacon of hope from all of this in the 1936 Games was an African American athlete, Jesse Owens, and he won 4 gold medals.
Wow.
Now, obviously, completely wrongly, the Nazis considered Jesse's race to be subhuman, and that was obviously completely wrong. But he proved them completely wrong by setting the world record in the long jump and the Olympic records for the 100 and 200 metres races. He also helped the American team set the Olympic record in the 4x100 metre relay. So Jesse was quite an astonishing athlete.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, absolutely. And showed them what for, I have to say. Right, so moving on from the 1936 Olympics, we then get to the 1968 Mexico Games, where overwhelmingly light-skinned, upper-middle-class women were chosen over their dark-skinned counterparts to be volunteers. So again, not a good look for the Olympics, really.
I mean, it's carrying on the tradition at least.
Well, indeed, absolutely. There are many stories of such incidents involving prejudice against athletes, minorities, and women, and obviously it's completely unforgivable and unacceptable. But it's easy to say, but things were different in the past, when people held different opinions, societies held different opinions. That doesn't make it right.
No.
But that is what happened. And obviously any large organisation, big as the IOC, will have controversies in their history, but that's not to excuse them, obviously. With that said, the modern Olympics obviously do try to be a force for good, and will have many countries compete to host them. It's obviously very popular. The next Games were due to be held in Japan this summer. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which we were obviously talking about earlier on, Japanese government and the International Olympic Committee have decided to postpone them until next year, 2021. So for the first time ever, well, apart from maybe during the Second World War, the first time obviously they'll be slightly delayed.
Yeah.
I, for one, am looking forward to the world's top athletes competing against one another next year, when we're all allowed outside again.
The glory days.
Exactly, that dim and distant future we can all hope to hang on to. But one last thing before I come to the end of my story. What became of Coubertin? Well, he died in 1936, aged 74, widowed and broke, due to a number of bad investments he'd made. A sad end for a man who brought us the Games that brings us together every 4 years. Shame.
Yeah, that is a shame. But his legacy lives on, I suppose.
Yes, absolutely, yes. Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, even with maybe slightly dodgy intentions or opinions at the beginning, it has
that's right.
become a bit more of a force for good.
Yes, fortunately it's evolved, and hopefully it does continue to evolve, and and there's less controversies.
Yeah.
But, who knows?
Did you get involved at all in the Olympics when it was in London?
No, I didn't. I was actually living in Australia at the time, so
okay.
but I did watch it on TV, obviously. But no, I didn't, unfortunately. How about you?
Yeah, we went along to we applied for tickets for a whole load of stuff and got not very much back. So we went to one event, which was it was a type of kayaking. I think they call it K2, is it something like that? It was kayaks with 2 people in them.
Okay.
And it was one of the early stages of that, but that was quite cool. And they had like an Olympic torch there that you could go and have your photo taken with, and all that kind of stuff. That was cool. I just remember going into London for meetings during that time, and London was absolutely deserted.
Oh, really?
Because there was all this fear mongering from people going, "Oh, London's going to be chaos. There's going to be all these millions and millions of people flooding the streets. The underground's going to explode. It's all going to go to shit." So everyone just stayed away from London. So it was great. I've never seen it so quiet. Wow. It was amazing.
That's incredible. I suppose Stratford must have been very busy. Where it was
hosted,
wow.
where the Olympic Park was and everything. But I wasn't going anywhere near there, thankfully. So
no, totally. Oh, wow. Fantastic.
Awesome. And I was very interested in what you were saying about Japan postponing their Olympics. I feel like they made that decision really late. Like they were really holding on for a long time to not cancel it.
Yeah, they were. I mean, obviously in sort of January, China shut down, and then February, sort of Italy, and then other European countries, and then obviously the United States pretty quickly thereafter. But yeah, you're right. I mean, certainly the International Olympic Committee, from what I remember reading at the time, were very much like, we're not going to postpone, we're going to continue, it's going to be fine. But you could see the writing on the wall.
Yeah,
I mean, when various countries major economies were shutting down or locking down, it was a matter of time. You can't, if your tourists can't come to the country, then you're not going to have a game.
No, exactly. And I get it. Like I imagine how many millions and millions of dollars they must have spent like setting things up and getting things in place and everything. So that's tricky to deal with. But like you say, no one was going to pitch up, or travel restrictions would have stopped people and all that kind of thing. So yeah, it would have been chaos. Wouldn't it?
And probably, I think even like certainly the GB team said they weren't going to send their athletes. I think other countries were starting to say the same thing. Yeah. So you may not even have any athletes if they continued. So yes, they made the right decision. But you're right, they did take a long time to do it.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, well, again, very interesting. I didn't know about the history of the Olympics. Yeah. Thank you very much.
No worries. What have you got for us?
Right. So I've got something a little different to that fun story of the great stuff of the Olympics. So this, I started researching this based again on a tweet from the QI Wikipedia Twitter account. I promise I'm going to find some other sources eventually, but they just get such good stuff.
Oh, there's pretty good stuff coming out of it so far.
So their tweet was that Ottoman Sultan Murad IV so disliked coffee that he would sneak out of his palace at night dressed as a commoner and personally behead anyone he found drinking coffee.
Wow.
Yeah.
Personally behead.
Personally behead. Now he was a particularly vicious guy, and we'll get to him eventually. So this led me down a little bit of a research rabbit hole of learning about sultans in the Ottoman Empire.
Okay.
So cool. Normally when I research these things, I do multiple Google searches and bounce from website to website. This time I put crazy Ottoman sultans into Google, and that first page gave me so much stuff I didn't need to do any more searches after that. It was amazing.
Wow. There's been a few then in the history of the world.
There's been a few, yes. So before we get into them, a little history about the Ottoman Empire. So it was founded in 1299 by Osman I. They conquered Constantinople and ended the Byzantine Empire in the process in 1453, and made that their capital city, from which they ruled an empire which at its height consisted of most of Eastern Europe, but also stretched from Middle East to Africa. Wow. At one time it controlled 32 provinces and had lots of nasal states. So nasal states. Vassal states. Oh, jeez.
Same.
I'm going insane. I'll blame autocorrect.
Yeah.
So its leader during the height of the empire was Suleiman the Magnificent, and I highly recommend researching and reading him about him. He really was magnificent. He did an awful lot. There's a particularly excellent series of videos on him by the YouTube channel Extra Credits as part of their extra history series. So I'll link that in the show notes.
Cool.
Unfortunately, after Suleiman, it kind of went into a very long but very steady decline. By the 19th century, it was known as the poor man's man of Europe, and like many empires was basically finished off by the First World War. So they were allied with Germany and they came into the war on their side. And whilst they actually didn't do too badly during the actual conflict, they did see various uprisings and wars of independence after the war, lost a lot of territory to the UK and France, and the Ottoman monarchy was officially abolished as part of the creation of the Republic of Turkey after the Turkish War of Independence, which was from 1919 to 1923.
Yeah, they didn't think about the First World War well at all, did they?
No, they didn't know. Back to the sultans. So the Ottoman Empire was an absolute monarchy for most of its history, ruled almost entirely by sultans, with the occasional Grand Vizier or Caliph sprinkled in. And oh boy, those sultans, they were an incredible bunch. So they practiced what's known as the rule of elderness. So it essentially elderness, yes. So essentially, it means that the throne passes from brother to brother, not father to son, like our monarchy does. So if you were the eldest brother, you would inherit the throne, but your biggest rival or threat would likely be your own brothers.
Yes.
Obviously, the logical thing and the most common practice in the early days was quite simply, and it was considered a done thing for a newly crowned sultan to celebrate his new position by killing all of his brothers.
Wow.
Regardless of their age. Which often meant that some of them were slain while still being babies and still at their mother's teat.
Wow.
So yeah, that was how that was dealt with in the early days.
I suppose you don't want anybody coming along and usurping you, so
exactly,
just get rid of them.
Exactly. Yeah, you got to be vicious, I suppose, to stay at the top. Sultan Mehmet II, and I'm going to apologise now because I'm sure I'm going to butcher these names as well. Mehmet II actually made this ritual killing into a law, dictating that for the order of the world, whoever succeeded in seizing the throne after the death of the old sultan shall kill his brothers and any inconvenient uncles and cousins to reduce possible civil wars or rebellions.
Inconvenient.
Exactly. So this was made into a law when he became a sultan.
Amazing. So, but if he ends up murdering all his brothers, then when he dies of natural causes, I'm assuming, who takes over?
So your son will then take over. So if you wipe out all of the son after that, if you wipe out all of the members of your family tree at the same line as you, it will then proceed down to your son.
Gotcha.
That's how it would go. So for the next 150 years, at least 80 such murders were committed of members of the House of Osman, which were the ruling family. The single worst offender was Mehmed III, who, upon being declared sultan, had all 19 of his brothers strangled.
Wow. I mean, if you're a brother of somebody in line for the throne, why wouldn't you just leave?
Well, yeah, you wouldn't want to hang around, would you?
No. Clearly 19 did, though. Bloody hell.
Yeah. So it's probably because of this particularly bloody episode that this practice was changed by Mehmed's son, Ahmed.
Completely traumatized by it.
Quite, having seen 19 of your uncles slaughtered, or heard about 19 of your uncles being slaughtered. So when he became the sultan after his father died, it passed to him because all of his uncles were dead.
Yes.
He was encouraged but refused to kill his younger brother, who was handicapped, Mustafa.
Oh, wow.
So he came up with a different option. This is when we enter the Topkapi Palace. So the Topkapi Palace is a beautiful building in Istanbul, which served as royal residence and administrative headquarters of the Ottoman Empire. Mm-hmm. So a large part of the building was dedicated to the imperial harem, which comprised of the sultan's mother, wives, and concubines. More on them later. And there was a lot of concubines. they kept a lot of wives, a lot of concubines. Generally speaking, in the situation where that guy had 19 brothers, they probably would have been over like 5 or 6 different mothers. The sultans weren't great at keeping it in their pants, shall we say.
No, quite liberal with it.
So tucked away at the back of the palace was what was officially called the Tower of Princes, but was more commonly referred to as the Cage.
One sounds quite pleasant, the other not so much.
No. So the prince's palace contained lots of different chambers known as kefes, which is with a K, which literal translation comes out as cages. The brothers of the sultan would be locked up so that they couldn't cause any trouble to the other sultan. So princes would be moved to this prison, some as young as 8 years old, and many of them stayed there until the day they died. They were not allowed to leave, But they were allowed to study, and tutors were permitted to visit, and also they were allowed to have their own concubines, but they weren't allowed to father any children. Could be worse, but could be a lot better. So it was effectively...
Sure, it's better than...
It was effectively
murdered,
a prison. Not a horrible prison, but it was basically a prison.
Yeah, for sure. Better than being murdered, but not ideal.
No. So the idea was quite simply that once the Sultan died, the next eldest brother would be released from their cage, ready to take over the empire.
All right, okay.
But
you go and lock the door, out you come.
Yeah.
You may have been sheltered your entire life in this little cage or this little room.
Well, yes.
But now you come out and rule our empire.
You've instantly seen the problem with the situation. So it's fair to say that it didn't quite work out the way it was planned.
No.
The cage system sort of worked for some sultans, but not for many, many others. So I've picked out a particular period. This is about 30 years worth of... sultans going from one to the other, so I'm going to skip around a little bit. Sure. So let's go back to our friend Murad IV, which we mentioned at the beginning.
The coffee hater.
Well, yeah, frankly, he was a bastard, an absolute bugger. So he was released from his cage after the death of Mustafa I, and he ruled with an absolute iron fist. It is noted that he seemed to be a very talented and efficient military leader, but I think that's probably just because he was a sadistic motherfucker.
It does sound that way, yes.
So, he hated alcohol and coffee and quite a lot of other things. So, as I mentioned at the start, he would disguise himself and patrol the streets at night. He would often have his guards with him, and he'd have them severely beat anybody that he found drinking coffee or alcohol.
Wow.
Very, very severely beat them. Repeat offenders would then either be executed right then and there, and as I said, often beheaded by his own hand, or thrown into the Bosphorus River and drowned.
Blimey.
He actually got worse as he got older in age.
Got
if
worse?
You can imagine.
How is this possible?
Well, just you wait. So, towards the end of his life, he sat in a kiosk in his palace, and he had a bow and arrow with him, and he would just shoot at any passerby or any boatman who happened to stray too close to the imperial palace. He had a musician beheaded for playing a song that he didn't like.
Wow.
He forced his doctor to swallow an overdose of poison. And he had a courier killed for delivering a message incorrectly by impaling him on a spike.
Suppose anybody want to go near him?
No.
Work for him.
It gets slightly worse. Eventually, towards the end of his life, he would just run through the streets after midnight, sword drawn in hand, swinging wildly, killing anyone he came across, and not just like stabbing or full on killing anybody he found.
Good Lord.
Yeah. So he was a lovely piece of work.
Yeah, psychotic.
Yeah, quite. His uncle, who was a sultan before him, also displayed some mental deficiencies. So historians...
You shock me.
No, I know, it's amazing, isn't it? Historians aren't quite sure if mental illness ran in the family or if the trend that you'll soon learn about was a direct result of the cage. But I think it's fair to say that it was probably a combination of both.
Yeah, totally. The way that royal families go on in the past,
yes.
intermingling with
exactly yes.
within the family, yes, and the cage.
So his uncle Mustafa, who he inherited from, he was put into the cage when he was 11. He was taken out and put on the throne at 25. So he'd been in the cage more than half his life at that point.
Wow.
Apparently, he greatly enjoyed pulling off the turbans of his viziers and yanking on their beards. He was also seen to throw coins at birds and fish. He appointed 2 of his uneducated servants to be governors of Damascus and Cairo, and appointed a farmer to high office after he offered him a drink while he was out hunting. So possibly a little mental unstable. Less of the swinging the sword and murdering people, more just of the slightly cuckoo kind of crazy. But not ideal when he's ruling your empire.
Not so much, no.
So his advice...
It's amazing that the Ottoman Empire went on for so long, really.
Well, yeah, quite. His advisors decided the best thing to do was to put him back in the cage. So they had
see why they do that.
They had a little bit of an internal coup and put him back in his cage, and instead appointed his nephew Osman to be the Sultan. Osman lasted a couple of years, but then was killed for being a weak ruler. So they were forced to go back to Mustafa.
Back to the cage, guys. Let's get him out.
So in the meantime, he had gone back to his cage, and he'd spent his time in between these reigns just in his cage with a couple of slave girls. But apparently they would sit around all day giggling and laughing together. When he was told he'd have to be sultan again, he refused to leave his cage.
I'm having a great old time in here. Leave me alone.
Exactly. Why would you want to? They did eventually kind of manage to get him out, but he didn't. His second reign didn't go any better than the first, and so then they made another one of his nephews Sultan. So
put him back in the cage again, did they?
Yeah. So then there was Ibrahim I. Now, considering the lineage of his family, it's quite impressive that he was known as Ibrahim the Mad. Considering what had gone before him. So his brother had killed their two other brothers. And I think understandably he was a bit concerned that he would also be taken out. But it seems that his brother died before he had a chance to do so. So when he was told that his brother was dead and that he would become sultan, he refused to believe it. He was convinced it was some sort of trap, some sort of trick that was being pulled on him. So he insisted on seeing his dead brother's body before he would accept the sultanship. So they brought out the dead body of his brother, and there we go. Then apparently he was unhappy.
Right.
Straight out the gate, apparently he displayed many signs of mental illness, and his advisors just surrounded him with concubines to distract him from making any terrible decisions.
They'd learned their lesson there.
Yes. Unfortunately, being surrounded by concubines did end up with him ordering 280 of them to be thrown into the previously mentioned Bosphorus River to be drowned after he suspected that they were plotting against him.
Wow.
Yes.
Very unstable.
Yes. So the last one I want to mention is the story of Mehmed IV. So he actually did a good job.
Oh.
He's considered to be a fairly pious man. And displayed no signs, thankfully, of lunacy or any kind of mental instability, unlike his relatives. He was able to rejuvenate the empire, but unfortunately, the reputation of the empire and its sultans was less than terrifying by this point, as you can probably imagine.
Sure.
He is remembered most for being humiliated by a defeated enemy. So his army had just beaten some Cossacks, and he ordered their submission. They refused and sent him a note calling him, and now are you ready? Are you sitting down?
I am indeed.
They called him a secretary to Lucifer, a Babylonian scullion, a Macedonian wheelwright, a brewer of Jerusalem, the goat fucker of Alexandria, the swineherd of Greater and Lesser Egypt, pig of Armenia, Podolian heir, catamite of Tartary, hangman of Kamyants, fool of the world and the underworld, an idiot before God, and the grandson of the serpent.
Wow, those guys don't screw around, do they? They lost the war and then still did that.
No, it's fair to say they weren't really scared of him.
No, not so much. Those Cossacks.
That wasn't the most humiliating defeat suffered by the Ottomans, however. So this is a little bit of a tangent from the crazy sultans, but I think just to give you an idea of the kind of the decline of the empire. So for their greatest and most humiliating defeat, we have to go to Napoleon. In 1799, Napoleon was laying siege to the city of Acre. While he was attacking the city with his cannons, a cry for help was sent out, and the Ottomans actually managed to raise an army of 30,000 soldiers. So Napoleon only had a small force of around 2,000 men, with another army of 2,000 men commanded by one of his generals. So he sent the other army to meet the incoming Ottoman army, planning to try and join it later.
Slightly outnumbered.
Yeah, 30,000 to 2,000 sounds like a bit of a slaughter. But the Ottoman troops were massively outdated, and the French army at this point was one of the best in the world. So for 10 hours, the Ottoman cavalry charged against the French line, but their anti-cavalry formations held strong. Because the Ottomans had such a number advantage, the guy who was in charge of the Ottoman army just basically didn't care. He just kept sending his men after wave after wave after wave, and they were just bouncing off the French defences.
For 10
hours? For 10 hours, yes, exactly. So eventually, Napoleon's army starts getting towards the battle. He sees that the Ottomans were distracted, so he sends a small force to attack their camp. So he sends a couple hundred guys to basically just go and fuck up their ship. The Ottoman general hears about this, and he thought this was the vanguard of a much larger army, and so began to retreat. He started retreating. The two French armies flanked him and turned the retreat from an orderly withdrawal to an absolute rout. Oh, wow. By the time everything had cleared and settled, the Ottomans had lost at least 6,000 soldiers, with another 500 captured. The French army had lost 2 men.
What? 2?
2. So for each French soldier that was killed, they killed 3,000 Ottoman soldiers.
Holy crap.
So yeah, so it's fair to say at that point in history they weren't at their fighting best.
No, not at all.
So there we go.
Certainly against the French.
a brief history of part of the Ottoman Empire and its line of crazy sultans.
Once again, I'm very happy to be living in the 21st century and not with mad sultans running around murdering people drinking coffee.
Can you imagine just like being in the city and you see this guy running around with a sword and like, what the hell's going on? Oh, it's just our sultan. Don't worry about it. Just stay inside.
Just don't get in his way.
Just, hide your coffee. You'll be fine.
Yeah, that's right. And then later, just avoid him completely because he might murder you as he's running through the streets.
I just love the idea. Apparently, he would walk through the streets like covered in a shawl or something, so no one could recognise him. And he'd walk up to a table of people drinking coffee, throw off his shawl, grab the guy, and just behead him right there at the table.
God almighty, can you imagine? I mean, why would you take the risk of drinking coffee with this nutters out there murdering coffee drinkers?
You think if anything was going to encourage people obeying a law, it's that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. You might potentially get your head cut off tonight if you're drinking that. You know, you've got a risk of it. It's possible.
I mean, yeah, coffee is life and all that, but there's limits.
That's right, yeah. When it's also death. Wow, that was very good, thank you.
So there we go. Crazy Ottoman sultans.
Yeah, completely. Very crazy.
Right. Thank you very much for listening to this week's We Love the Internet. If you've enjoyed anything you've heard this evening, or if you have any knowledge of the topics we've been talking about, or if you go on your own research trip, please do let us know. You can find us at www.welovetheinternet.co.uk, and on there you'll find links for all of our various social media accounts. We are WLTI_podcast on Twitter and Instagram. You can find us on Facebook, and we have a YouTube channel, and there are contact us buttons all over our website, so please do get in touch. We'd love to hear your feedback. If you've enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on iTunes. That really helps us out. Also, tell everybody, tell the world.
Yeah, for sure.
Spread the good word of We Love the Internet. So until next week, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. See you, bye.
Bye.